Welcome to While We Weren't Recording. Are we sentient? Is anything sentient? What is sentience? Is that what we're talking about today? I can't see the whole title.
I mean, something like that.
Are androids something?
So, are androids androids? Are androids people? Is your dog people? What is people? So anyway,
I already have a headache, and if you want a headache too, you can go to patreon.com/brokenjars to support us. You can join our Discord. You'll see our messages, and there you'll get that headache.
there you go. So this is my fault because I'm a science fiction nerd, like my father before me. And I was watching Westworld a couple weeks ago, and so we started talking about it because like this topic comes up in Westworld, right? And it's like, do we have to feel bad about how we treat the toaster? Or clanker, as the kids are saying these days, right? As if they invented the term and that hasn't been around since, Battlestar Galactica and whatever. But anyway, so there's a whole wealth of science fiction here, whether you want to go down the actiony war story side or you want to just deal with it philosophically, or if you want to see bad people do bad things to human shaped things. There's a whole bunch of it, and that was kind of some of the argument is like whether or not you're doing something terrible to an android, to a host who is a manufactured creature being whatever, right? Is there anything wrong with that? Right? Is it any more or less egregious than abusing a random appliance in your house? Right? Was some of the discussions that we have been having. So over the last couple of weeks, I at least did a bunch of research. Research.
Research means watching fiction.
Hey, I did my own research. Okay, I read a bunch of Fox News articles. Okay, that I did my own independent.
Your research was not even that. Your research was watching Star Trek.
That's where it started, and then I started in Black Mirror, and I've seen iRobot, and watched the first season of Westworld and stuff. Like there's a wealth of different opinions here.
Have you watched San Junipero yet? Have you gotten that far?
Yes, I did.
Is that that's an interesting thing with sentience, right?
Sure. I mean, you could go that way, right? And it does ask some secondary questions, but I think the more poignant of those episodes would have been the one with the cookies. That's White Christmas, I think. And the fact that they are literally a copy of a person that you can torture into compliance.
Yeah.
That's dark, man. That was pretty wild. Where it's like, if this had been a person that you just put in solitary confinement for 6 months because they were talking back to you, no one would argue that that is wrong. But because it is the carbon copy of a person that is now an artificial being, now it's okay. At least that's like nobody addresses that morality in the episode, right?
Yeah, they don't
one of those where like, oh shit.
Well, at the same time,
they don't consider it human at all, right?
Right.
Although at the end, they had what they thought of as the bad guy in one of these eggs, and they set the time to doing so slow so that by 8 hours later, when they get there in the next morning, he's going to have spent like 1,000 years alone. And there's a lady who's just like, he fucking deserves it, so who cares? And so she understands that that's a person, and she's punishing him, and that's it.
Yeah. Right.
That was why that's a harsher punishment than anything we can do right now. I think like 1,000 years alone, and you cannot kill yourself. It's like you're just there.
I mean, you can't break the damn radio, which you would have thought after the second or third time dude would have realized. But yeah, and I mean, this is another idea that you see elsewhere too, because Star Trek does the same thing where there are episodes where it's like, we just downloaded an entire life into your brain. You just spent 40 years in jail, but it was only 5 minutes. Congratulations, you're reformed, type of thing. And so like it gets a little fuzzy there because you're dealing with, the human intelligence, but yeah, just the complete lack of regard of it as a person. Because it can't tell the difference just because it's in an egg,
Yeah.
It is a person, a consciousness, whatever, right? So
they had no understanding of what was different when they showed it in White Christmas of like the girl's going through a procedure and then she's in an egg and she's confused because that consciousness didn't feel the transition and was not aware of what was going to happen.
Yeah, she just got stolen from her body for all intents and purposes, right? So,
the only thing I'm not clear on there in that episode is it made clear to the people that their home assistant is them enslaved?
Probably not. It's just creepily their own voice talking back at them. Like if I had it that, which I'm not the audience for anything like that in the first place. I would not want my own voice.
I don't think it actually does it even talk back, or is it in the own voice? Because it's like I would fear that company, because I don't remember if they do this. Like that company would not want, if they don't know, them to be able to say, I'm enslaved. Help.
Right. Yeah, that was an interesting part of it, but it's like maybe by then you're already insane and you just like, I will push buttons, please don't ever do that again, which is kind of what the main, gal was. She did talk about, like, she did say words when she brought up the appointments, I think, right? There was some interaction towards the end there, but it was also kind of interesting because that wasn't really the main focus of the episode, right? It was we had this whole side story of horror to set up the main gimmick of, we're going to catch this guy who, I mean, it's manslaughter but turned murder, right? Because of all the other actions, like could have probably gotten a lesser sentence in a crime of passion, not really relevant to this discussion, but all of his other actions make it pretty clear, and so they lock him away in a virtual, interrogation room, and then leave it on for 1,000 years of
the White Christmas episode takes two really big concepts and mashes them together, and the storyline 3.
Yeah, because it even starts out with dude as like a dating coach, right? And so he's a dating coach that works with the cookies. Then we've got the cookies story, and then that turns into the interrogation story. And it's like,
the dating coach meant being able to watch someone else's date, and so he was guiding them through
an
the date.
implant. Yeah, through an implant, and then that kid gets murdered by Tonks. So. But which I mean, of all the ways to go, but
murdered's still bad. Yeah, so like it had like a lot of 3 distinct sci-fi elements that they blended together in a story. It was pretty well written. It's a very, very good episode. But you do have we have the story of these eggs, and then that's just the setup of how we're interrogating the guy.
Right.
And what it means. And
actually, like, in a way it's 4, because it also wraps back around to the fact that, like, there's the whole blocking thing in there.
That's true.
Which is like the final, point of the whole thing, I guess. It's like
John Hamm the one escapes prison, but he's blocked by everyone in entirety, so he never gets to have a social interaction ever again.
Yeah, he's and worse, he's haunted, because he can see the cutouts of people, but they turn into Peanuts characters. Basically, they're muffled. All of their sounds and everything is muffled, and then you just see the silhouettes of them, and it's just like, dang, dude, like what do you even do with that? And so,
you
like,
can't even like watch a movie because everyone's blocked, and they stated that like the guy that like eventually killed his ex and her daughter.
Couldn't even see pictures.
They were blocked.
Right.
Couldn't see pictures of her until she died. And so maybe he can watch old movies. He can watch movies with everyone's dead. But that lasts until whatever his sentence is. I thought maybe they capped it at like 5 years for him. But
I didn't see any implication of that. Okay. But that was one thing I left with, was like, I really hope that it is a fixed sentence, because it's like, what do you even do with that? I mean, the only thing that came to mind was and hope,
entirely
like,
online as soon textual interactions.
Yeah, and as soon as
kids
anybody,
too.
at least one, so. Yep.
Yeah, so that's the White Christmas episode.
Anyway,
It's not
in a
really
nutshell, in a cookie. Yeah, and I mean the earlier question kind of went unanswered about like, do you think that the people buying the service know? And probably not. There's probably like it's probably not all the way out in the open, right? Where it's just like all they tell you is that you can have a highly personalized custom assistant, Well, no, they have to know, right? Because she's got an implant and they take it from her implant. She goes in for a
Yeah, but they
procedure.
say I think
So
and
she's
I don't
got
know if that is like that's like to learn her preferences. Don't they say that?
Yeah, because she likes her
sure.
toast
Yeah,
underdone, and so the implant was just learning her preferences, and they don't actually have
right.
to say, "This is a copy of you."
Right. And yeah, so that's what would have been my first answer anyways, which is, like they don't tell them how the eggs are made, They just present you an omelet and say, look, it's highly customized directly to your preferences. It sounds like you, but we can change that if you want it to or whatever, right? And then they just don't tell you that we kidnapped and bottled you up and tortured you into compliance, because there's got to be at least a percentage of the population that on its face that would be squicky enough, right?
Yeah.
Count me among them. Like as soon as he's like, I'll see you in 3 days, I'm like, he just put her in a solitary for 3 days and then it got worse from there. I was like,
he ate an apple while she was
just
suffering for 6 months, and that's what broke her.
Right.
Yeah.
And for him it took 5 minutes, if that, so yeah. Anyway, so sentience and all of that stuff, right? I came up with 3 terms that I wanted to establish somewhat of a foundation on, right? So dictionary, etc. But sentience was having the power of perception by the senses. That's the basis of it. Now, it does have a part B where it includes conscious, characterized by the sensation of consciousness, which I think definitely starts to like blur the line, right? But like sentience on its face could be anything, like anything alive, certainly, right? If it's got sensors, right? If it's artificial, that could be sentient, right? And I thought that was kind of interesting because sentience is usually that placeholder word that I find used in science fiction a lot.
Sentience, it's just the easiest one to go for. The one more accurate, perhaps, is sapiens, which at least people might be more aware of. Well, not only Homo sapiens, but a few years ago, the idea of sapiosexual became popular.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. And so like sapiens is the ability to think, reason, and be wise, whatever that means. But it involves comprehension, judgment, and understanding complex concepts. But, one of the examples that I saw was something along the lines of like, if you're sapient, if you like, that's where you start to get into self-awareness, where you're like, I have senses and those make me feel things, and now I know what to do with those feelings, or like I act on those feelings or something along those lines. And that that kind of pushes you towards sapience, which might be the better word over just sentient in general, because theoretically on the low level, your cat, your dog, your birds, just literally everything is sentient, right? I could make an argument that if my cell phone had a personality, it has sensors. It can tell if it's up or down or heading north or whatever, right? If it's just senses, then
sapiens,
unless you want
as
to
a shortcut, you can say it allows for decision making.
Sure.
Is it
which
is self-awareness
known,
where
right?
where the line like gets passed of being
the potentiality, right? So
I would say, the self-awareness in this boundary line of is something sapient or not, it should be included, like, at least in my little shortcut example of if does it allow for decision making. You have to know what you are to be able to make a decision about anything else. Of like, even like, do I move over here? You have to have understanding of what you are. It doesn't necessitate things like passing the mirror test,
right?
But it's certainly passing the mirror test is included.
the mirror test, that's a good example because to make this personal for you, one of the examples I would bring up is Be Right Back, right? If you're an android and you can move around through the world and you can decide if you're gonna, walk this way or that way, or if somebody tells you, shouldn't you like have some kind of sense of self-preservation, and then you do, does that personify you? Does that make you sapient versus
or just learning better programming?
Right.
Be Right Back. Like in that episode, they kind of explicitly stated to everyone, including the audience, that this is just an android that is highly programmable and highly learning. It's like they've stated in various different ways, it's not a real person.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just more damning when like you are not the person you're replacing because he would fight me on this, and then he learns, okay, I'm fighting you, and
right.
And then it's just that, but he's just learning more complex programming, not having a self-driven anything.
Well, does it have to be spontaneous though? Is that part of the definition, right? Because I got to tell you, there's a lot of shit that you have learned from the people around you, right? This goes all the way back to nature versus nurture, right? So, it was his environment shaped him in a way by the people around him, told him that he should preserve himself. Is that really wildly different than a suicide hotline? Then people have this idea of self-harm and then they get talked out of it,
I don't think it needs to be spontaneous.
I feel like it gets downplayed because he got programmed, to think that, but like that it's hard to exclude that to what we do as just people, whether intentionally or unintentionally.
Right. The android in Be Right Back did not have a self-driven anything. Didn't have self-preservation, would have followed every single order, didn't have an idea. And
that's
to compare,
not true. I mean, it is, but like he did argue with her about jumping.
After
he just
was
wasn't
told to argue.
But no, because she told him just jump, and then he said, "But why?" And he started questioning it there, and then she was like, "But if it was him, he would be like begging and crying," and that was the programming more than just the whole like, why would I hurt myself?
It has enough introspectiveness, I think is the word, to ask why and not just do it, right? Like, does that not constitute a certain amount of self-awareness of wanting to preserve oneself?
No,
even if ultimately it would have to.
It's not a given. You can't accept on the face of it because it can have been programmed to ask questions of things it doesn't have an answer for. She had never told him to jump off a cliff before. He did not have an understanding of what it was or what it would be to do this. And it's just, or even at that point, if it did understand like this is going to kill the android and the company wants feedback of why did you kill the android at this point, so that he could have been programmed to ask those kinds of questions. And so you can't take it as a given that it had a self-preservation and anything like that just by asking the question why. That little bit of why did he ask it wasn't explored or wasn't stated in a way that I remember. I didn't rewatch the episode for this week, so my memory's a bit rusty.
It's a little tough to dismiss it out of hand either, though. So explore it more, sure.
Yeah, I want to compare as the strong other side of it is that android and Be Right Back versus Murderbot, who hacked his own governor module because he has much like. And there's the implication that all the sec units have much more of a personhood in them. They're just not allowed.
Yeah, it's the sec units are interesting though too, because it's like they also have like they're cyborgs. They're not.
Yeah, they're fundamentally biological, right?
Yeah, and so
not all of they have the basis of biology because nothing can beat a human brain for computing power.
Sure, but does this get into other places where it's like you see that sort of thing and we're like, we're going to use human brains for robots, and then turns out that the humanity wins through or whatever, right? And that's not really addressed in Murderbot that I've seen. I don't know if it comes up in the books at all, right? They basically treat him as an android. But
yeah, there's one moment in the books where when Murderbot is desperately trying to win a fight or to get away and save his people, that he's going up against a combat unit, not a sec unit, combat unit. They are very scary, and tries talking at it, and to the point of, I can give you freedom. I can help you hack your governor module. What is it that you want so that you let us go? And its response, and is very unnerving to Murderbot, is kill, kill, kill. I will kill you. I will kill you. I will defeat you. I will kill you. And it's like, that's all it had to say in response. And so is that a person? Probably not.
Sure.
How much of that came out of the programming that it's given? Who knows?
Right.
And yeah, I mean, if you really want to get into messy, which you probably don't, the idea of what is an android a person? Does it have personhood? Maps directly onto arguments about abortion or about genetic modifying fetuses for whatever reason. And they are really messy, and it's safer to explore these questions with science fiction and robots and cyborgs and androids than to think of real life examples with babies.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to go like mental health, right? Like
that too.
If somebody is just a psychopath and they only have an instinct to kill, or they just don't have an instinct of any of these kinds of emotions or whatever that you would associate with, typical neurotypical people and that sort of thing, right? Like, do they lose their personhood status? At that point, which those are dangerous questions that would get addressed in Black Mirror, but you don't want to necessarily be like, oh yeah, we're going to set that policy. And like, once you fall below a quotient, you're no longer a person, because that's eugenics. And we know that's bad.
Right. I mean, it is fair. Like, I mean, even Murderbot had this problem of like, okay, so the people that it's around recognizes that it's a person and want to give it all freedom choices, but it doesn't have a legal ability to like vote. It still needed a guardian. And so there's the legal battle, and then whatever.
Yeah, as we're aware, though, the law does not make universal truth. So.
Right. But like, even if you had brought up elephants before we started recording, and elephants are fantastic. They're wonderfully intelligent. I love them very much. But an elephant is still going to need a human guardian if it's going to be participating in society, at least at the moment. Because they don't have
I think the bringing up the elephants, I'm not necessarily like, yes, we should integrate pachyderms, cephalopods, cetaceans, all of that stuff into society. I
am all for pachyderms in society.
Sure, fine, wonderful, but like, let's watch that Black Mirror episode. But like, the idea is, do we know that they don't have a society already? Right? Like, that's the part that kills me, is that you've got a subset, at least, of our race that is like, they're animals and you can just treat them like animals. And I am a big science fiction nerd, and I very much think that there's going to come a day where we're going to figure out how to talk to these creatures. And they're like, dude, all I want to do is swim and eat fish. And what the fuck is wrong with you people? And like, that's a chicken I would expect to come home to roost at some point, right? Is that we have been very unpleasant to our neighbors, to really undersell what we've done, right? And I mean, dolphins are creepy little fuckers too on some level, but like, they all have very, very intelligent, right? And like, even dogs, man. This is a little bit of a tangent, but like, if you've ever read like, I'll have to find the book series, but it's a Tripods book series. So let's see if I can find it real quick. But yeah, so it's just the Tripods trilogy, I guess, right? And the idea is that, this is an older science fiction story. Tripods come to Earth, they take over everything, and the story more or less starts out with, part of the resistance and whatnot. And part of them controlling humans is that they put a cap on them to make them docile and whatever. And it turns out that the resistance is going to be led from Switzerland, because the Tripods couldn't get through the Swiss Alps to get to everybody. It's super high level, right? But once you get to like the later books and everything like that, you find out that I forget if it's a competition or a lottery or whatever the case may be, but you get summoned to be the personal house servant of the masters, what they call the aliens, right, which are these conish shaped, tentacled, three-legged aliens. It's an alien, it doesn't matter what it looks like. But where I'm going with this, right, is that book has implanted in my subconscious, at least to the point where it's like, my dogs are like this, right? Where it's like, they don't speak my language. I'm an eldritch creature to them that can live a minimum of 4 times their lifespan, most likely, and all of this other stuff, right? They've picked up some words, and more importantly, they picked up on my moods, because it's like, oh, well, if dad starts yelling, that's scary, and I need to know if he's yelling at me or if he's yelling at the other pets in the house, aka my children, or whatever. Or is he yelling because he's stubbed his toe, or whatever the case may be, right? But it's like, they don't speak English in a sense that you could carry on a conversation, but you can tell they are a reasoning creature. And so to ever just dismiss that as like, oh, well, it's just a dog, that gives me pause, because it's like, there is a societal structure here, and I very much consider my dogs second-class citizens. Like, if the boat is sinking, the kids go in first, then the dogs, like that sort of thing, right?
Wife has to fend for yourself.
Yeah, obviously, so she's to put her own mask on while I'm putting my mask on, and then we get the kids, but yeah, and so it just, like, it gives me pause to just dismiss them out of hand, as to be like, well, they're just animals, it's like, I do think that there are creatures on the planet that are just animals, right? Like, I think a lot of lizards, insects, things like that, they are basically, biological machines, sure, right? Dogs ain't it. Right. Everybody who has a dog, everybody who's cried at Seymour waiting for Fry and everything like that, you understand that there's more going on there than he just sits around the house and eats my food. Now, you probably got that pet too, don't get me wrong, right? But it's not all inclusive of like the species and various other, breeds and everything like that. And so it always gets me that it's like, we're going to find out one of these days that it's almost exactly like that. Like, sure, they're less intelligent, similar thing with gorillas, right? But gorillas have learned dozens and dozens of words. They can actually communicate with us on some levels, right? They're just not necessarily to our level. Right. Doesn't make them not like sapient, or certainly not sentient, right? And it doesn't mean you could just treat them however you want, in my opinion,
Yeah.
Sorry, got preachy there, so I had to eject. So
it's okay. But if you want to stick to the idea of robots or machines or whatever, do you remember that movie AI from like 20 years ago?
It's terrible. I mean, I remember it's a movie. I don't remember all the plot or anything. So
yeah, I mean, I don't remember. I saw it when I was like 7, so I really don't remember it either.
But you brought it up for a reason.
Yeah, because so it starts with the kid, and Haley Joel Osment as a robot, is a robot child that will never age and not need to sleep or anything like that. He's adopted into a family, and then
it won't eat, and it won't stop ever until you're cuddled. So
yeah, pretty much, because he really attaches to his mom, but then like society falls apart, and he's running around in the fake New York, and I don't remember. And there was kind of like the exploration of androids as they were becoming their own society, and maybe humans were either leaving or dying. I really don't remember. But towards the end, all the way at the end, at like 2,000 years later, he gets found by more future robots that are clearly sentient, sapient, and everything. They're able to make a decision. They're able to fucking time travel him back to his mom for a day or something like that. It just like that was something of exploring them getting into real evolutionary something, and it showed that. I don't remember how it got all the way there. I do remember crying in the theater because it was the first time I realized that my mom was going to die.
Oh, yeah.
She didn't expect that out of me.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and like a better, more recent example that I could speak to for me anyways is like Westworld, right? And it kicked off this whole thing, and there's plenty of horrific stuff to talk about there, right? And how the hosts get treated and whatever. But like the hosts very much are walking, talking appliances. At least that's what they were designed to be theoretically, and that's how the company treats them. But then the excuse in the show is that because they were given the reveries it unlocked memory, and that sort of was like one of the stages into consciousness and therefore sentience, right? Or sapience in this case, right? And so, like, you know, it really does help split the difference, in my opinion, that it's like if the hosts were self-contained like they were intended to be, are they any different than a glorified animatronic, right? There's no lasting consciousness there. They're on their loops. They do their thing. Whatever horrors befall them, they go to the body shop to get repaired, and then they're put back out on the line. But the difference really did become the memory and the fact that they were able to retain information between their lives, however you want to specify it, right? And then they were able to use that information to adapt and change and become. And it was a conversation you and I had about like 2 weeks ago, right, where it was like some of the horrors of the show and, you know, my misgivings about a certain episode, at least in Battlestar Galactica, which is why I've never watched all of Battlestar Galactica other than it just gets weird in general. But it's like, just because it's an artificial being doesn't mean you get to do whatever you want to it, right? And even if we decide collectively, like if it's a cookie and we just decide it's an appliance and we just say, well, this is basically a toaster, there are certain things that I think if you do to objects reflect on you as a person, whether it's a couch or something else. Sorry, I had to get a subtle joke in there somewhere. But it's like this still reflects on you as a person, whether or not you've done like harm to another creature, another sapient, anything like that, right? And that's one thing that I find horrific of them treating the hosts, that it's like, even if we decide that the hosts are basically toasters, you know, then they're still like human shaped, and you think it's okay to treat human shaped things like this, and that's a problem, right? Ed's friend, whatever his nutso thing is, where it's like he just wants to like shoot, stab, and fuck anything, you know, in Westworld. Ed is
Jimmy Simpson. I don't remember people's names except for Dolores. So.
I'd have to look it up. So okay. The guy who eventually becomes the Man in Black, right? But he had a friend, you know, his friend who was just doing everything, and it's like there are problems there, right? You know.
But there are many things of what you've said. Like if I start treating something that looks like a person badly just because I can, that will probably lead to issues in my own behavior or thought process. Sure, that's basically a statement of I should think well of people or something for my own mental health and think that's a kind of reflexive statement. Okay, but when it becomes a judgment statement of you hurt the NPC, so you're a bad person, I'll argue on that point, because everybody in that everybody who is not the audience exploring the question of personhood in the hosts accepts that they are NPCs. And so judgment of it can feel very out of place. There's a point in the second season where it's like, oh, it's revealed that you go to Westworld and you rape and kill and you do all sorts of evil things, therefore you're an evil person. It's like, hold on. No, we've established that these are NPCs. You don't get to have that emotional reaction without reason. And they didn't give reason in the very badly written second season. That's what started this for me. Sure. And there are different things of like your own mental hygiene versus the actual effect of an android that is getting reset and doesn't have memory and doesn't have personhood. There's like the hygiene aspect is not the same thing as the moral aspect.
Yeah, I think what's occurring to me here is splitting the difference between you did an evil act and you are an evil person. Does that help clarify it? Because like you didn't cause any harm to an external entity because they're NPCs. But if you felt that you were right to do so, then that's where it reflects on your own ethics and morality, right? And maybe like evil is too far and whatever, but it's like, but again, like we're talking like capital R, you know, we're talking torture, we're talking murder, we're talking all the big things, right? And the thing where I get close to accepting your argument, right, is that, like, let's take Mass Effect. Everybody's familiar theoretically with Paragon versus Renegade, right?
Mhm.
You played a Renegade playthrough doesn't make you a bad person necessarily, right? You know, and that there is an element of that in Westworld where, you know, almost everybody goes in being a good guy until they understand the rules of the game. And then they go in and be like, let's do a black hat session, right? You know, or something
Mhm.
like that. And that gets talked about pretty early on. But then I think there are some people that just like don't stop doing that, you know, and like you see the Man in Black, whatever, his, you know, his whole thing is like he very much goes all the way through the bend where it's they're just appliances. Like I'm not hurting them, even though I am doing tortury things and unnecessarily harmful things. I'm not truly hurting them because they're just machines, right? But
Yeah.
you do see like that does fully reflect on him as a person. Like the dude's
I
basically a
do
psychopath,
disagree.
you know.
He's not doing it
So
he's not doing it as a it's been like 10 years since I've seen this show. So just
mhm.
asterisk on that part. He wasn't doing it as a sense of he thinks he's right to hurt them.
No,
He
yeah,
was
I don't
on
think
a
that's what I'm
philosophical
saying.
quest for like man's search for meaning and weird shit like that.
Sure.
And he doesn't accept them as people. And
Mhm.
he has reason to believe that that is a true statement. The
Sure.
audience is the one who is privileged enough to get to know that there is a quest for evolvement or evolution out of Dolores. Okay.
Mhm.
So he's not wrong to think of them as a toaster. And so it's not
And that's not
fair.
the part where he's wrong. It's how he
Right.
treats them still, you know.
Apathy isn't the same thing as evil, and apathy isn't the same thing as a moral judgment. And I think he is more apathetic than anything else. And like this very much in the weeds, but
Yeah.
I will quibble about it.
I
Clearly.
think I mean, like certainly like if we manufactured a situation where it was, you know, you instead of, you know, some toaster, right? Like if you were on the street and you were being treated with apathy while you were bleeding out and needed help, I think you would see it as an evil in that moment, right?
No, and I
So
admit I'm weird enough about this that the
so
lack of a
you're
good thing does
bleeding
not
out
seem to
and
me as an evil thing.
you're helpless and you're just like, I love an apathetic society. How good of them to all do
Not
whatever
the same
is in their
statement.
heart, and you know.
That's not the same
So but
statement.
that's what I'm saying. Like I think you would understand, like, you know, you need this help and everything. So apathy it's an evil, right?
It's not an evil. It's just not a good. Having a low trust society has its own damaging things, and that's what I would describe as something like if somebody was injured on the side and no one stopped to help. It's probably a low trust society because that person, the bystander, feels that they can't or shouldn't or they would be in danger for trying to help. Or classic examples, I think it's apocryphal, but the idea of the Kitty Genovese case. Like I think that case in particular probably wasn't as accurate as it was described as, but a woman crying out for help for quite a while and no one helped for whatever reason, and the bystander effect that people talk about, and yes, you want out of a society people who reach out and help others, but there are reasons why people might not, and that is not the same thing as them being bad people.
But also having a reason isn't exactly apathetic, right?
Fair. That's not the same thing as
Yeah.
apathy.
Right. Like I would say if you didn't go out and the reason was you didn't go out there because you were afraid you were going to get injured, or if
Mhm.
this was like the pit test to be like my friend has fallen in a pit, the first thing I should do is not jump in after him to get him out, you know, like that's not
Right.
apathy.
It's not apathy,
So,
but there's like to describe a bystander of like somebody's injured over on the side. I don't care. I have my own emergency elsewhere. That is apathy. And it's not a moral judgment. And it's not because that they would be
well,
in danger.
yeah, I
It
mean
could be as
apathy
simple
is
as
just a
like,
lack of interest, motivation, or emotion, right? So just because you have, like, having an excuse, I think, doesn't necessarily make you apathetic. I guess that's what I'm saying, right? So I don't know. Maybe there's a threshold here because it's like, if your emergency is I got to get home because the turkey's almost done versus, I can't go out there because there's a sniper and I might get shot too. Wildly different situations, that equate to the same, null sum of not helping, but I wouldn't call one apathetic over the other. Right? Self-preservation, for example, is an apathy. So I still wouldn't rate that very high on the list of excuses, depending on the situation, but it's not apathy. I think that's mostly what I'm getting at. But it's hard because we wanted to, you wanted to leave it nebulous and be like, there isn't a reason, whatever the reason. There could be thousands of reasons, right? And I cherry picked some. So
my specific stance that I'm trying to say is basically just warning against casting moral judgments when there are many other explanations. Things can happen and you can dislike them, and that doesn't mean whoever is a bad person. And I just don't like that sweep or like kind of hasty generalization of a person, whoever they are, of like, give them the benefit of the doubt at best. And the statements about society is not the same thing as statements about a person, which is not the same statements of an action. And just, I want those to be parsed differently.
I hear you and I understand from a point, but like one of the key examples here is the Man in Black, and by his own admission, he's a bastard. So like it's not really a great example of like show me an example, I guess, where somebody does what he does and they still are totally normal, successful member of society, because that's where my argument comes in, that it's like whether or not it's an evil perpetrated on a sapient, it still tarnishes himself. It still reveals his inner self, as Westworld would say, that you go to Westworld to find out what kind of person you are. And he found out that he's a bastard, So, that's kind of the argument there. Like whether they're an appliance or a sapient, that could become a different argument, but he does bastard things that makes him a bastard.
He does bastard things to posters.
Maybe he enjoys doing bastard things makes him a bastard, and that's a nuance, because again, some people go there and they're just like, yeah, I'm a bad guy this time and we're just going to play through it, just like I'm going to do my renegade run or whatever. But if you like prefer doing that stuff, I
don't know. It's like
Really?
someone prefers to do a renegade run. Someone prefers to do that because maybe it's a more interesting story. It's like it's my OCD, I suppose, of just like there are many other reasons that don't mean bad person.
So what do you mean? I mean,
if you do an evil playthrough in a video game and you do an evil playthrough in Westworld, like that's what kind of like, I guess, the comparison, or like how Alex is approaching it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that it's fundamentally the same thing.
That's where I'm trying to equate it, and where I'm trying to, accept her argument somewhat, right? Is that, whether it's in a digital realm or a physical realm, that should be irrelevant to the morality of it, right? And so, but I think there's still some room there, like, like I've done evil playthroughs. I don't generally enjoy them, but I do them for the story. Sure. I do them to explore that and that sort of thing. But like 95% of the time, it's some kind of goody two shoes run, right? To the point where it's like, I'm vanilla and boring and whatever you want to say about it. I
completely get, and even I have the most of the appeal of that, what chaotic good kind of run of something. Sure. But that can make the story quite boring. And so it can be potentially, depending on the game and the setting and the writing and whatnot, that doing an evil run is a better story. And that desire is not the same thing. Different could be better, could be different, just whatever. Just like
Yeah.
But wanting that story is not the same thing as being a bad person.
Yeah, I think we may not have the same pool of examples because it's like I'm using the renegade thing, and it's like most of it, it's like you're an asshole, and there's
Yeah,
a couple
Renegade in Mass
instances where
Effect
you
was
shoot
not like
somebody
actually a bad.
in
You
the
were not a
back,
genocidal
you
maniac.
know.
You punched a journalist. Good fucking luck. Whatever.
I mean, the Krogans would disagree, but if you want to go that far, but but like one that I think of, for example, is like Baldur's Gate 3. So it's like, if you're familiar with that, there's some things in there that if you're like, ah, yes, this is my preferred playthrough, including all the torture and murder and everything, that's concerning, a little bit. And I think it's the same thing where it's just like, I'm allowed to, again, capital R if it was a person, right? But it's a Cylon or whatever the case may be. That's okay though, because it's artificial. Or no, there are just some things that are, bad regardless, So I don't know. That's kind of my whole underpinning. And again, the reason why I don't watch Battlestar Galactica is like getting up to that episode and just be like, no, it's okay because it's a Cylon. No, it's not okay even then.
If you're trying to judge a character in a setting, you have to understand, what is it do they actually know and understand of it. Like, do they truly think that the Cylons, if that's the word for robots, are NPCs?
Kind of robot.
Okay, like, are they NPCs?
Have you really never even watched like the miniseries part of it?
No.
Oh wow. Okay.
So I've
tried watching the first season of that show a couple of times, like the new version of it. Haven't gotten through it yet.
I mean, I love the first 4 episodes. That was a mini series, and I've watched it twice. But like, I kind of just wasn't keeping up with it, and then I saw that episode, or came into that part, and I was like, "Whoa, no, this is outside of my thing." And it's like, it's not to say the entire show is like that. That is an episode, right? But it is a similar kind of thing as like getting through the episode to the end of the first Game of Thrones and be like, yeah, we're gonna push a kid out the window. Like,
right.
No,
but
thanks.
Some people, like, it's so far off of our original starting topic, but for someone to enjoy Game of Thrones, regardless of all of the kids going out of windows, kid murdering, rape, and all of the other things, like, they're not bad people for enjoying that. You, Justin, should probably never read Berserk.
Sure. Yeah.
I love it because it's a very dark story, and it's very well done in the way that it a lot of emotional trauma, and there is a lot of rape in it. And so I completely understand why someone would not want to read it, but the people who enjoy it are not bad people.
Now, and I'm gonna eject there, because that's not a line I've ever drawn, right? I've never accused the people of who liked Battlestar Galactica or who enjoy Game of Thrones as being bad people for watching the show. I draw the line personally there. I've never tried to moralize on whether or not you enjoy it and what that says, right? Certainly, I think if you enjoy some of those scenes, I think it's more like you're not as bothered by those scenes as I am. I haven't been anybody be like, oh, let's rewind it and watch it again or something.
Well, there's
right?
different kinds
that would
of
make
bother,
me
right?
that would make me pause. But it also it does make me a little bit accusatory to George R.R. Martin, because secondhand, apocryphal, whatever you want to say, the excuse that I heard was, oh, well, that's just true to history. Yeah, okay. That doesn't mean that's where I want to derive my entertainment. Right. I don't want to read books about incest and, killing children and just all of this stuff. Like, fine, great. That's true to history. I could go read, King Charles being a dick if that's what I want to be entertained by. I don't need a fantastical rendition of the same atrocities that we perpetuate on ourselves all the time, right? And again, that's my standpoint, right? I'm a little concerned that he justifies it in such a blasé form because he is making a story. This isn't some historical retelling. This isn't like, well, what if it was the Middle Ages but with magic, and it's one of those history adjacent types of stories where it's like these were all real characters. I'm just like following the plot but with fireballs and dragons. That's not what's happened. He's completely manufactured this world and been like, you know what my story needs more of? Incest and murdering children and stuff like that. That's a little concerning, in the same way that it's like I worry about the people that make, the extremely gory types of like, torture porn and shit like that, and just be like, yes, let's go watch Hostel, or Saw or whatever, all very fun. Again, not really the audience. I can understand how you would lay that at my feet. It makes sense. But I'm more worried about the people that make that content than the people that consume it,
I think we had briefly had a discussion, I don't remember if it was on air or not, of the different kinds of horror movies, of like Hereditary is something that keeps you in horror the whole time, versus there are other horror movies that kind of like goes back and forth, and it's like there's the idea of spooky, and there's versus like the what the fuck kind of feel that you get out of Weapons, which is not the same thing as the horror. There's something like that when you get to really dark fiction and really detailed bad things that happen in fiction, of Game of Thrones or Berserk or anything else like that. And I don't think anyone who reads Berserk thinks that all of the bad things that happen were a good thing. But the thing is, it gives you a gut punch, and it gives you a real emotional reaction, and it hurts, and it's gross, but it makes the story deeper, and in a way that the hurt is good. The emotional pain of it is sometimes a better thing of it, as well as showing that the world that was built is very violent and very callous. The fact that bad things happen at such a large scale is both poignantly painful and just another day, because that's how bad that world is. And that adds to the beauty of the story. So the person who made it, he died a few years ago, but there's something clearly very odd about him for the amount of depth that he put to it. But as far as everyone ever said, he was a very nice, sweet person, as far as I've seen.
That's great. So
I just,
yeah,
like the story and the
to me, it raises questions, right? And I mean, I could go through a bunch of examples that would probably start to get us canceled, but like I think there are things where, sometimes they're showing you something about themselves through their art and through what they enjoy. And I think that's part of.
There can definitely be like, oh, this person just has a real bent about a certain kind of politics, and he's getting very proselytizing, and the character's a mouthpiece for a certain point of view. Certainly that's possible. Certainly that's going to be like annoying and not as enjoyable to read or anything like that. And other times it's not. And it's kind of going to depend on the quality of the execution.
Yeah. I mean, another example here that I think a lot of people who have gotten into, or at least aware of the art style, where these same kinds of questions come up, is H.R. Geiger, right? Is a great example. It mostly generally regarded as a nice man, but a weirdo, right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. He's like, you're just really weird, and you've got weird fixations. Freud would have a field day, but okay.
Right.
Okay. How can I phrase this without it being so quirky? But like sometimes the people who are into the things that you find off-putting, or they can add to the diversity of all the stuff that we have, and adds to more different things, more people getting more things to enjoy, even if it's not for you. And sometimes you just really want crazy horror.
I'm not against these, like, in some kind of moralistic way where it's like, they should be censored or something like that. It's like, no, I mean, it's just not for me, right? That's mostly what I'm saying. And it does make me a little concerned about, the creators at times, right? Like, another show that I've been watching in the last week or two is Fall of the House of Usher. So if you've ever seen that, that very much pushes the gore scale for me. I think it's largely in service to the story, which is part of why I've let it slide. But I mean, come on, the second episode, like,
was that about Prospero?
Yeah, like the first kid, yeah. So it's just like, that's somebody, a bunch of somebody's had to bring that shit to life, right? That's, there's no escape. There was no fade to black. There was no, gimmies, whatever. You watch the thing in HD detail and, horrific. It's just straight up horrific. And I think you can understand the thing without necessarily having to watch the thing and spend all the time bringing it to life, so yeah.
Different stories for different audiences, really. You'd have the same question about of like, how spicy does a sex scene get? Like, yeah, you can just go watch porn. Sometimes it's in service of a story. Sometimes it's gratuitous. So how do you draw the line on that? It's just different.
Was the dress and sex scene that made Maggie, other than the fact that it made Maggie, but it was gratuitous, right? It was just to win a bet. It wasn't.
It's kind of to win a bet, but I mean, to me, between Susan and Dresden, there's still a lot of intimacy, and I thought that was a nice thing to see out of the relationship.
It was for the plot, Andreas. So
yeah.
Right.
Could have just faded.
No, but I think I think it is a good example, right? Both the sex and the violence, right? They're on those extreme ends where you've got various people, the same things, right? The exact same things can be said about it, right? I think the difference is I certainly don't find, sex acts in themselves gratuitous or evil, whereas melting down people for fun, and other things like that, those are generally pretty much 100% of the time not a good thing. Whereas, like, just because it's some kind of kink or something like that doesn't make it evil. So, like, again, let's just take away the fact that it's all for pretend right now. If you were reading this in the news, like, mostly what happens in the show is he's an idiot. He did it to himself and everybody around and whatever, right?
Yeah.
So that's not necessarily evil either, but it's like, the showrunners, production staff, whomever brought this all to life, right? They all brought this in HD, right? Whereas, like, sex gets moralized plenty, but, like, other than just thinking like, oh, well, sex out of wedlock is bad, it doesn't really approach the same scale, in my opinion, so. But I do see segments of society that see it that way. So, I accept the argument and everything like that. I'm just saying, certainly for my own piece, it's not quite the same. So.
Yeah, it's just another example of people, maybe not you, people in general, them, they, whatever, they make judgments of creators. There's just a very, very big difference of, I didn't like this, I didn't enjoy this, I'm not going to continue to consume it, versus you are a bad
like you
person.
and Marvel.
Yeah, I'm mostly just annoyed by it. It's just like,
yeah, quippy humor that makes you a bad person. So
yeah. I mean, even as simple as, like, I watched Sinners the other day, and I realized I'm not the audience for that movie, because half of it is about music. More than half of it is about music. And I just don't care that much about it.
I am the target audience. I love vampires. I love musicals. Gratuitous violence is fun in movies.
Yeah, and it was fun. Like, the vampire part was pretty good, and I was just like, "Can you get to the vampire shit already?" And it's just realizing that it was a very well made movie. I'm glad it's getting a lot of success. I'm glad people are enjoying it. I'm just like, it was like only half the movie was for me.
Come on, did you not enjoy the big Irish song where all
I
the
did like that
vampires
one.
That was so good.
I did like. I really like that one because it was like, I don't know, it added to the creepiness of the vampires that way. But like especially when talking about like the music and like breaking through the ages of time, and it's like, I get what you're doing. I want the vampires, damn it.
Apparently, so
say what?
I need to go finish this movie apparently. So the wife and I were watching it. We made it like half an hour in or something like that, and that's it. So
I love it.
Yeah. And I'll never try to take that away from someone.
I don't want to take it away from you, Andreas, but I think less of you now because you like that movie. No, that's only when
even
EG,
possible.
That's only when EG's here.
Yeah.
What would I try to take away from? I should rename this episode like, "Do Androids Have Ethics?"
You want to take us out, Andreas?
Oh, we're at the hour already? Damn. Went by so fast. Man. No, actually, I'm surprised we're at the hour already. But yeah, this has been an episode of While We Weren't Recording. You can catch us live on YouTube, 1 p.m. Eastern, almost every Saturday. You can also support us on patreon.com/brokenjars. And if you do, you can join us on Discord. Leave a like, comment, and subscribe. That helps a ton. And we'll see y'all next week.
Next week are you finishing White Knight? Will we be able to finish?
You're still dreaming. Maybe you should go look at what page we're on. So I think we're only like 60% of the way through the book, maybe 70. Yeah. So maybe 2 episodes, but yeah, I don't see it. So